Shalom Aleichem. We continue in our study of Hilchot Avodah Zarah v'Chukot HaGoyim, the Mishneh Torah, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimun, Zichrono Livrocha. Perek Shishi, beginning of Perek Shishi, which you should presently be able to see on your screens. Omer Rabbeinu, Ha'oseh ov o yid'oni birsono bezadon hayav koref. In other words, it's a very serious matter. Previously, if you look for a moment back to Perek Gimel, we saw, as you should be able to see now on the screen, Kol ha'oved avodah zarah birsono bezadon hayav koref. So there we're talking about worship and the halachic definitions of worship we discussed in Perek Shilishi. In other words, Zevicha, Nisuch, Haktara, etc. Now, in Perek Shishi, we learn that not only worship, but also various activities, various forms of fortune telling and raising the dead, and in order to glean information of one sort or another. These things were in ancient times and still are very common, much more common today than many people believe or realize. And not just in countries like India or what have you, where you can find shrines and idols and what have you on every street corner. But anywhere you wish, anywhere you turn, you will find such things. Because human beings have a desire to know the future, to connect with the deceased, or to bring about a curse or something on another person. All manner of reasons people have for doing these things, and the Torah forbade all of these things. And it's a very serious matter. So a person who, and we'll see exactly what an ov and a du'ani are in one moment, doing such a thing, even though it's not Avodah Zarah in the most obvious sense, but it is clearly connected to Avodah Zarah. In other words, trying to connect with and benefit from all manner of spiritual forces people believe exist. That itself is an act that distracts and distances one from Hashem. The only way to be in connection with Hashem is to know that there is only Hashem. And even if one believes that these things might work in some fashion, which is a separate discussion, it is clearly a sword, and very much so. So again, ha'aseh ov o yid'oni, be able to see this on the screen. Birsono bezadon hayav kareth ve'im hayu sham edim v'hatra'a. If there were witnesses and he was warned, yiskav, he is to be put to death by stoning. Hayav shover, if he did this without realizing that it's a sword, for example, mevi hataf kevu'a. Then a korban hataf is called for. Halacha beth, or still aleph in some editions. Kesad ma'aseh ha'ov. What exactly is an ov, which the Torah discusses? Zeh shehu omed umaktir ketoreth yedua. The person who burns incense of a particular type, v'ohez sharvit shel hadas biyado umenifo. In other words, a branch of hadas, of myrtle, in his hand, and waves it about. V'hu b'daber belat b'dvarim yidu'im athlam, and he recites all kinds of formulae, usually whispering, עד שישמע השואל כאילו אחד מדבר עמו. So that the person who has come to him with this requesting information through this medium, כאילו אחד מדבר עמו, the person hears by some kind of subterfuge, as Rambam will discuss later, as if someone is speaking to him, ומשיבו על מה שהוא שואל בדברים מתחת הארץ בקול נמוך עד מאוד. This of course reminds one. This reminds one of what is called a seance, which is something similar. Hearing, as it were, some kind of voice or things on the table move or what have you. וכאילו אינו ניכר לאוזן אלא במחשבה מרגיש בו. In other words, you have to add a healthy dose of imagination to hear, as it were. But people are very good at imagining all kinds of things if they're so motivated. As we see today, people who wish can believe that a man can be a woman, and people who wish can believe that the world is about to come to an end because there are too many human beings, and if we would all only cease to eat meat and butter, then the planet would be saved. People can't believe anything at all if they are so motivated or bamboozled. And here it's important to mention the following. Most people do not have opinions. This is a fact. Most people do not have an opinion on anything. They hear the opinions of certain other people to whom they hold in high regard, or to whom they feel they owe something, or people from a group or class to which they wish to attain and belong. And if they see that most people in that group, in that stratum of society, in that milieu, are of this opinion, that's by definition, automatically, that's their opinion. And therefore, if it's fashionable to hug trees and claim that we should stop using oil, because that's the in thing to do, that's the enlightened and moral thing to do, so to speak, then they'll be there. And if it's important to be seen with the right people shouting from the river to the sea, whether you know which sea and which river we're discussing, what part of the planet we're talking about, it makes no difference. The main thing is to be there. Excuse me. The main thing is to be there with the others of your societal grouping, so that you're with the right crowd. And the same is true with these matters. If most people you know believe in all manner of sorcery, magic, witchcraft, which is what we're discussing here, if that's what most people believe, you will believe it. Because most people do not want to be different. That is a basic element of human nature. Only a minority of people are able to overcome such basic human predilections, and therefore whatever is believed by most of your peers, that is what you also will believe and accept without thinking. All right, so we continue. Halacha Gimel. or still halacha aleph in some editions. וכן, הלוקח גולגולת המת, ומקטיר לה, ומנחש בה. Or there are those who somehow obtain a skull and burn incense before it, and by various other methods or actions, they divine certain information, or so they claim. That's called nahash or nihush in Hebrew and the Torah, in Chazal. Ad sheyishma ki'ilu kol yilseh mitachad shehyo, so that the claim is that a voice is heard emanating from his armpit. Shafal admo, a very, very low voice or something like that, or mishivo, and responds to him. Kol elu ma'aseh of him. All these are different forms of what's called ma'aseh of. V'ha'oseh had mehem niskal. And there are people, as I said, today among us who believe in these things and actually actively do such things all over the world. I once met a black African from Nigeria who actually was mitgayer. He became a ger tzedek, a very interesting gentleman. And he told me that in the capital city, it was quite normal when in the morning, if you walked around in the street, to find headless corpses or parts of corpses lying around. And he explained to me that voodoo and all sorts of other practices are very common. And as we just mentioned here, you need a skull for that purpose sometimes. And what can you do? If you need a skull, you need a skull. And so you do whatever you need to do to get that skull. And this was quite normal and common. And he said it was well known that government ministers and top officials in government were all involved in these activities. One of the reasons that these things were not usually investigated, or the culprits were not found somehow. And the same thing happens in other countries as well, perhaps not as frequently, but it happens.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The examples that the Rambam gives, are they just examples of how this is done in general? Or, for instance, does somebody not have karet if they do all of these weird divinations, but instead of having hadas, they have some other plant that they hold?
Yes. These are the ways that were most generally known and practiced in the time of Chazal, and already in the time of Tanakh, we see some of this and later. But anything along these lines, I think, is clearly included. By the way, the discussion of hearing, a voice from one's armpit or all sorts of things, this is can easily be understood as some kind of ventriloquist. There are such people who are able to produce what sounds like speech, at least some kind, even if it's perhaps distorted speech. There are people who are good at doing these things, and they're called ventriloquists, and they exist. And this was part of the one of the requirements to be such a person. Okay, now we move on to Daled or Beth. Halacha Daled over here. Ketzad ma'aseh ha'yid'olim. מניח עצם עוף ששמו ידוע בפיהו. A certain bone from a fowl, a bird, is taken. The name of the bone itself is yadua. Umaktir ketoret, and some kind of incense is involved. Incense was almost always involved in these things. What's ma'asiyot aherot, and other various actions and strange goings on. Ad sheyipol kenichpeh. In other words, the person induces in himself a kind of trance-like state. The word nichpeh is generally understood if a person is truly ill with this disease, then we're talking something either about epilepsy or some kind of strange psychotic attack episode. Some people, unfortunately, suffer from such things. That is true. Here we're talking about a person who induces such a state in himself. There are all kinds of we also have in certain Christian churches the concept of speaking in tongues, etc. It's people can work themselves into a kind of frenzy, so that they start saying or doing strange things, and they sometimes end up fainting, collapsing, speaking what they call in tongues, in other words, making sounds that no one understands, what have you. None of this is new. En hadash tahad shemesh. There is nothing new under the sun. This is all seen and heard before. One of the differences nowadays is that some of these people wear white coats to indicate that they are scientists, and thus they establish their authority. But they nevertheless are talking nonsense on various topics. So one needs to be wary of anything that smacks of any such thing. ועושה מעשיות אחרות עד שיפול כנכפה, וידבר בפיו דברים שעתידים להיות. And then makes all kinds of predictions, telling the future. וכל אלו מיני עבודה זרה הן, and all these things are connected to עבודה זרה. In other words, even as we said, even though these actions themselves are not acts of worship per se, you're not worshipping a foreign god in an obvious fashion, but these types of actions were always connected to Avodah Zarah, because you have to believe that there's some higher power behind and underpinning all these things. So these were always known aspects of Avodah Zarah, of connecting to spiritual forces in the world, in the universe, and therefore the Torah outlawed all of these things. We know about various forms of nichush. In other words, trying to predict future outcomes in different ways. A common practice mentioned explicitly in the Tanakh also. Let me see if I can bring this up for a moment on the screen. One example is in Sefer Hezkel, I should say. Just a moment. Hezkel, Perek Kaf Aleph, chapter 21. Pasuk Kaf Waw, 26, verse 26. Perhaps I'll bring up the English translation as well, just a moment. Very well. On your screen now. Sefer Hezkel, Kaf Aleph, Kaf Waw, 21, 26. Ki Amad Melech Bavel, Al Im Haderech. For the king of Babylon stands at the parting of the way, on the junction of the highway. Berosh Sheneh Derachim, at the head of the two ways. Liksom Kasem, in order to divine what will be. Kilkal bahisim, he shakes the arrows to and fro. In other words, the idea there was apparently that you would move and shake these arrows in their what's the name of the receptacle in which the arrows are placed? Quiver, yes. So you would shake them about in such a way, and then divine something from the pattern in which they scatter or move about. He inquireth of the terafim, sha'al batarafim, he looketh in the liver, ra'a bakaved, slaughtering the animal, sacrificing it, and then having your priest look at the innards and the internal organs. And this was a common form of nihush, of divination. Also in ancient Greece, for example, etc., etc. It appeared these things appear explicitly in ancient classical Greek texts, for example, etc. So, halacha he or gimel. הנותן מזרעו למולך ברצונו ובזדון חייב כרת. ושובר מביא חטאת קבועה. We'll discuss exactly what the molech is in a moment. Not always did we'll see in a moment. A person who gets involved in this such worship or such activities is chayav kareth v'shover if he doesn't know what he's doing, or it's a sur hatat kavua, regular korban hatat. V'im'asa be'idim v'hafra'a niskar שנאמר אשר ייתן מזרעו למולך מות יומת עם הארץ ירגמוהו ואבן. So it states explicitly in the Torah. Wa'azhara shelo minayin, where does the Isur itself is mentioned? Tinoth lomar umizar'acha lo titen laha'avir lamolech. Ulhalan hu omer lo yimnaseh b'cha ma'avir b'no v'ito v'esh. So the Torah mentions this on a number of occasions. Now there were people who engaged in child sacrifice. That was one form of this dastardly activity and belief system. But there are also people, they did not necessarily commit the child to the flames, but they brought the child close to some kind of special furnace they had, usually in the form of some god, so to speak, some supernatural being, and the child was passed over or above the flames. Rambam discusses this in one of the Nevuchim. People believed that such an act imparted protection from the relevant god or gods. Kesad hayuosim, says Rambam. And how did this work exactly? Kesad hayuosim madlik esh gedola. So there's a large fire or furnace. ולוקח מקצת זרעו ומוסרו לכומרים עובדי האש. So this had to do with worship of fire, obviously, which is also something which was practiced in many civilizations and cultures. A person would hand over their child, the father usually, to the priest, the fire worshipper. ואותם הכומרים נותנים הבן לאביו אחר שנמסר בידן להעבירו באש ברשותן. ואבי הבן הוא שמעביר בנו. And so the Kohen the priest received it and returned the child to the father. And then the child's father, אבי הבן הוא שמעביר בנו על האש ברשות הכומרים. And he's told to pass the child over the fire in this way or that way. ומעביר אותו ברגלו מצד לצד אחר בתוך השלהבת. Lo shahu sorefo lamolech, not that he is burning this, committing this child to the flames. Kadesh sorefim b'lehem v'lehem l'avodah zarah heret. Ela b'ha'avara billevad hayatha avodah zeh sheshmo volech. We're not talking about sacrifice, but about this specific action that was called l'ha'avir lamolech, because this involved passing over the child over the flame. לפיכך העושה עבודה זו, עבודה זרה אחרת חוץ ממולך, פטור. So doing the same thing to another form of avodah zarah, technically the person is patur, is exempt. As with other actions, as we saw, that if a particular action is usually associated with this particular form of avodah zarah, and a person does exactly that action, but to another form of avodah zarah, then that's considered avodah shelo kedarka. That is not the usual and, so to speak, proper avodah for this deity, and therefore the person would be patur. Furthermore, Rambam says in Halacha Zayin or Daled, "Eno hayav karet or sikila ad sheimsor lamolech v'ya'aviro beraglo ba'esh derech ha'avara." It has to be done in this particular way, whilst holding the child's foot or leg. Masar, and first he has to hand it over to the priest and receive the child back. Masar v'lo ha'avir, ha'avir v'lo masar. But if he didn't follow the playbook precisely, or shemasar v'ha'avir shelo derech ha'avara patur. If he didn't do it exactly according to the instructions of the priests and their usual practice, then the person is patur. Of course, it's asur, but he's patur from being tried and executed by the Beit Din. And it also has to be done to some of one's progeny, but not all. Miksato mizar'o implies miksato v'lo kulo. Some of, but not all of. Now, as for the child in question, ehad zera kasher v'ehad zera pasul. So zera kasher is a child born in wedlock by his wife. That is a zera kasher. Zera pasul would be, for example, a mamzer. So let's say a person slept with an eshet ish, another man's wife. The child would be a mamzer, and for our purposes, it makes no difference. Ehad bano uvnotav, ehad banehem v'nivnehem, whether it's his children or grandchildren. Al kol yosei yerechahu hayav. All of his descendants are included in this isur, in this prohibition. Mipnei shehem zaro, because the Torah speaks about zaro. Avalim ha'avir ehav o ahyotho o avotho o she'avir asmo o patur. But if one did this deed, this action, this avera, with another person, even a family member, but not his descendants, he is patur. Ha'avir ehad mizaro v'hu yashen o she'yas someh patur. So if the person was blind or somehow asleep or in a stupor or something of that nature, when doing so, he's also patur. Halakha tet. Mas'eva she'asara Torah. He binyan she'yu hakol mitkavasim esra v'afilu l'avodat Hashem sheken haya derech avodah zarah. Here we're talking about raising up, erecting a stone. In other words, an upright stone was erected, was buried partially in the ground usually. And it was a place, this, as it were, sanctified that place and made it into a place of worship, whether it's to worship Hashem or anything, or any other false god. שנאמר, ולא תקים לך מצבה אשר שנא אדוני אלוהיך, וכל המקים מצבה לוקה. And he who does so, however, is not hayav karet, is lokeh. It's less serious a matter. There is a site in ancient Yerushalayim. I'm trying to remember the exact location. I was there a few years ago. It was discovered. It was a kind of underground, a large underground chamber. It seems to, if I recall correctly, was the outskirts of ancient Yerushalayim. Let's say Yerushalayim of the time of Beit Rishon. This was somewhat outside the city limits, underground. And I was once present. I took part in a certain trip, a field trip, with a certain guide and a certain archaeologist who was involved in the dig where they found this entire area that was excavated, and it was quite clear that it was some form of a religious site of some kind. There were quite clearly these large areas cut out from the living stone, with channels running to some collection point, which is for blood of animals or something like that. And there was also a relatively small stone that was erected and found in that position, erect and standing up quite clearly. Obviously, something that couldn't happen in nature. Who exactly was behind this is less clear. But one of the claims that I recall, one of the things that was said to us was that it was apparently connected to the Yevusi, and or other people like Givronim, who ceased to worship Avodah Zarah, but they were allowed to worship Hashem in their own way, and establish such artifacts and such sites. So I was once present at such a site. So that's called a maseva. And we see that Yaakov Avinu did such a thing. The Torah forbade this. So this was before Matan Torah, obviously in the time of Yaakov Avinu. But this was a common practice, as we see in the beginning of Parashat Vayisei. So this was a well-known practice, not necessarily connected to Avodah Zarah, but the Torah forbade all such sites, all such practices outside of the Mikdash, in order to clamp down on Avodah Zarah, because again the inclination and the desire of people is to get involved in such things, and these things always eventually lead, spiritually speaking, certainly to disaster. That is the way of these things. And something similar, Even Maskit Ha'amura B'Torah. This is a kind of stone platform on which one prostrates oneself. Even though you're doing so with the intention of worshipping Hashem. שנאמר, ואבן משכית לא תיתנו בארצכם להשתחוות עליה, מפני שכן היה דרך עבודה זרה. להניח אבן לפניה להשתחוות עליה. This was a practice that was very frequently associated with Avodah Zarah, and the Torah outlaws it entirely, even if it's not for Avodah Zarah. ולפיכך אין עושים כן להשם, and we do not do this even to Hashem. ואינו לוקה עד שיפשוט ידו ורגלו על האבן ונמצא כולו מותר עליה, שזוהי השתחוויה When the Torah speaks about hishtahawaya, it's talking about prostrating oneself with arms and legs extended. There is a certain discussion what is done with one's hands in this act of ishtahawaya. Are the hands extended to the sides or directly in front of one? Yeah, that's something which is, I would say, not 100% clear. But at any rate, the only place that a Jew is allowed to do this is in the Mikdash. And that's why, for example, um, on a stone floor, and stone means stone. It doesn't mean a ceramic tile or a carpeted floor or even a concrete floor. On a stone floor, we do not do nefilat apayim for this reason, as is well known. When is this true, that this is asur? In which situation is this asur? In other words, everywhere on earth, outside the Mikdash. Aval b'Mikdash, but in the Mikdash itself, mutar lishtahawot l'Hashem al ha'avanim. Shene'emar lo titanu ba'al ishtahawot aleha. That's what the pasuk states. Not, you must not do so in your land. Ba'al sechem en atem ishtahawim al ha'avanim. אבל אתם משתחווים על האבנים המפוסלות שבמקדש. There are those, again, who claim that this is true for other types of flooring, not just stones, but I don't think that is correct. I think it has to be a stone floor, stone tiles, not other materials. And that is why, and the Rambam continues, for this reason, Rambam says, for this reason, Naharu kol Yisrael lahasi'a mahasalot b'vatei knesiyot harusufot ba'avanim. So if you have a Beth Knesset, where the floor is tiled with stones, the minhag of all of Am Yisrael is, in order not to end up doing nefilat apayim on such a surface, is to lay some kind of mat or even straw, or minei kash, whatever, lavdil ben penehem uven ha'avanim. But if you have no such material between your face when you prostrate yourself and the stone floor, then you have to find another spot to do this. Or you're allowed to prostrate oneself but not lie flat, so that your face is not directly on the stone. And this is the source for performing nefillat apayim in various ways, not precisely in this fashion. Rambam discusses these matters in Hilchot Tefillah. We'll look for a moment here in Hilchot Tefillah. Just one moment. Here it is in Halacha Perek Hey Hilchot Tefillah. Halacha Yad Daled or Yad Gimel. Should be able to see it here. Hishtahawaya Kesar. Speaking about Tefillah, Rambam says, Ahar shemachbia rosho mikriya hamishit. In other words, at the end of the Shemona Esrei, Yoshev la'aretz, you sit on the ground, v'nofel al pano arza, and you fall flat on your face, u'mithanen b'chol taharim sheyoseh. And then Rambam continues in Halacha Tetwa or Yudaled, Kishehu oseh nefilat panim ahad tefillah, when one does so after the tefillah, yesh mishehu oseh qida. There are those who perform something called qida, which is bowing down but not prostration. وَيَشْ مِشُ عُسَىٰ إِشْتَحْوَيَا. There are those who prostrate themselves. Therefore, Rambam tells you here, وَأَسُورْ لَعَصَاتِ إِشْتَحْوَيَا عَلْهَا أَبَنِيمْ إِلَى بَمِقْدَاشِ. But it is asur to do so on a stone floor outside of the Mikdash. כמו שביינו בהלכות עבודה זרה. ואין אדם חשוב רשאי ליפול על פנו, אלא אם כן הוא יודע בעצמו שהוא צדיק יהושע. And a person generally understood to be a very important and significant personage connected to the Torah, the Chacham. אין אדם חשוב רשאי ליפול על פנו, אלא אם כן הוא יודע בעצמו שהוא צדיק יהושע. For fear that if he is known to people that he's praying for something and this thing does not happen, then it'll be a certain Hilul Hashem. Aval hu pano ma'at. But what you can do and should do is to lean over and be above the ground, but not directly above the ground, not with one's face flat on the earth. That's why Rav Sa'dia Gaon writes in his Sidur that Nafilat HaPayim is done in a semi-supine fashion, for example. So now, the reason the Rambam says that you may daven in one spot and say the Shemona Esrei in one spot and do the Hishtahawaya and the Fiat HaPayim in another spot, is precisely for the reason we just mentioned, that if where you daven there was a stone floor, you cannot do the Hishtahawaya there, but you can move aside, you can go to another room or outside or wherever it might be, in order to do Nafilat HaPayim. There does not have to be literally in the same place or even the same room or the same building. We shall end here for today.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So the Rambam says that it's okay to do Hishtachavaya anywhere in the Mikdash without any sort of qualifications, but there seems to be some sort of safek as if to whether when the Beit HaMikdash was last expanded, certain areas were sanctified or not, and if it would be okay to do Hishtachavaya perhaps in the southern side.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that the concept mikdash in this context needs to be understood in a generic sense, a broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that area, that precinct known as the mikdash, even if it's technically a place where you could do hakrava or not, whether it was technically part of the Zarah or the Ezrat Nashim or whatever it might be, I don't think that's the issue here. The issue here is it the place known as the mikdash? Then it's mutar. If it's something else, even if you're claiming you're doing this lifnei Hashem and your intentions are pure, it's asur. Why? It's all a harhaka from Avodah Zarah. As we have discussed many times, and no doubt we'll find cause to discuss in the future, Avodah Zarah is a common thread in human experience, including within the Jewish people, and that is why the Torah goes out of its way in such detail to distance us from anything to do with Avodah Zarah, because it's very one is easily entrapped in the snare of Avodah Zarah in all its various forms and all the various beliefs and practices and concepts that are part and parcel of that worldview. We shall end here for today. B'ezrat Hashem, hiyu beruchim, hizku v'yames levavchem, kol ha'meyahalim l'Adonai. Shalom v'nisachon.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.